Security was dragging her away from the stage. Elvis dropped his microphone. 20,000 people fell into absolute silence. The International Hotel, Las Vegas. July 23, 1973. What happened next would be talked about for decades. But to understand this moment, we need to go back to when the night began. 3 hours earlier, backstage at the International Hotel, Elvis Presley was preparing for what would become one of his most legendary performances. The venue was sold out, 20,000 people packed into every available seat, and thousands more gathered outside hoping for a glimpse of the king of rock and roll. Elvis stood in front of his dressing room mirror, adjusting the collar of his white jumpsuit adorned with golden eagles. At 38, he was at the peak of his Vegas era, commanding audiences with a presence that had evolved from the young rebel who'd first shaken up the music world. But tonight felt different. There was an energy in the air, an electricity that even his seasoned band members could sense. 5 minutes, Mr. Presley, called his manager from the hallway. Elvis nodded, taking one last look at himself. He'd been performing in Vegas for 4 years now, but the thrill of connecting with an audience never faded. Each show was a chance to touch lives, to make people forget their troubles for a few hours. He had no idea that tonight, one person in that massive crowd would need more than just entertainment. But as Elvis walked toward the stage, 16-year-old Sarah Mitchell was sitting in the front row, fighting back tears that had nothing to do with excitement. Sarah had saved every penny from her part-time job at the local diner to buy this ticket. She'd hitchhiked from Phoenix to Las Vegas with her older sister, telling their parents they were visiting a friend. The truth was, Sarah was running towards something, or rather, running away from everything. 2 weeks earlier, doctors had given her father 6 months to live. Cancer had spread through his body faster than anyone expected. Her mother spent her days crying in hospital corridors, and Sarah felt invisible, forgotten in the chaos of medical appointments and hushed conversations about treatment options that might not work. Elvis Presley's music had been her escape. When "Can't Help Falling in Love" played on her radio, she could imagine a world where everything was beautiful, where love conquered all problems. Tonight was supposed to be magical, a chance to see her hero, to feel something other than the crushing weight of watching her father fade away. But as she sat in that front row seat, surrounded by screaming fans, the reality hit her again. Tomorrow she'd have to go back to Phoenix, back to the hospital, back to pretending she was strong enough to handle losing the most important person in her world. The lights dimmed. The band took their positions. And then, in a flash of white and gold, Elvis appeared. "Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis Presley!" The crowd erupted. 20,000 voices screaming as one, the sound so powerful it seemed to shake the building's foundation. Elvis waved, that famous smile lighting up his face as he grabbed the microphone. "Well, good evening, Las Vegas!" The opening chords of C.C. Rider filled the arena. Elvis moved with the fluid grace that had made him famous, his voice powerful and confident. The audience was in the palm of his hand from the first note. But in the third row, something was wrong. Sarah had started crying. Not the happy tears of an excited fan, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere beyond grief. The woman next to her asked if she was okay, but Sarah couldn't even form words. The music that was supposed to heal her was somehow making everything worse. All she could think about was how her father would never see her graduate high school, never walk her down the aisle, never meet his grandchildren. During "Love Me Tender," Elvis noticed her. In a crowd of 20,000 people, somehow his eyes found this one teenage girl whose tears weren't tears of joy. He'd been performing long enough to recognize the difference between excitement and pain. He continued singing, but his focus kept drifting to Sarah. She was pressed against the stage barrier, her small frame shaking with emotion. Security guards stood nearby, maintaining the usual perimeter that kept fans at a respectful distance. Elvis finished the song, but instead of moving into his next number, he did something unexpected. He stopped. The band looked confused. The audience murmured uncertainly. Elvis walked to the edge of the stage, directly above where Sarah stood crying. "Sweetheart," he said softly into the microphone, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "What's wrong?" The question caught everyone off guard. This wasn't part of the show. Sarah looked up, startled to realize that Elvis Presley was speaking directly to her. I. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. That's when security moved in. A large guard approached Sarah, clearly intending to escort her away from the stage area. The last thing they needed was a disrupted show because of one emotional fan. "Come on, miss, you need to step back," the guard said firmly, reaching for Sarah's arm. And that's when Elvis Presley made a decision that would be remembered forever. Elvis watched the security guard reach for Sarah, and something inside him snapped. This wasn't about crowd control or maintaining order. This was about a young girl in obvious pain, and no protocol was going to stop him from helping her. He dropped his microphone. The thud echoed through the arena's sound system like a gunshot. 20,000 people fell into absolute silence. Elvis stepped to the very edge of the stage, then did something that made his bodyguard's hearts skip a beat. He sat down on the edge, swung his legs over, and jumped down into the audience area. The crowd gasped. This simply didn't happen. Elvis Presley didn't leave the stage during a performance. Security didn't know how to react. His band stood frozen, instruments in hand. "Sir, you can't," the guard started to say, but Elvis held up a hand. "It's okay," Elvis said quietly. "Let me talk to her." He knelt down in front of Sarah, his white jumpsuit now at her eye level. Up close, she could see the genuine concern in his eyes, the way his famous features softened with compassion. "What's your name, honey?" he asked gently. "Sarah," she whispered, still not quite believing this was happening. "Sarah, I can see you're hurting. You want to tell me about it?" Subscribe now, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about Elvis Presley. And there, surrounded by 20,000 people in complete silence, Sarah found herself telling Elvis Presley about her father's diagnosis, about her fear, about feeling lost and helpless. Words poured out of her that she hadn't been able to say to anyone else. Elvis listened without interrupting. When she finished, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a white silk handkerchief, one of his signature accessories that fans often tried to catch when he threw them into the crowd. But instead of throwing it, he gently wiped the tears from Sarah's face. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent arena, "your daddy is lucky to have a daughter who loves him so much. And I want you to know something: you're stronger than you think you are. Love that's strong? That doesn't die. That lives forever." He placed the handkerchief in her hands, closing her fingers around it. "You keep this," he said. "And whenever you feel scared or alone, you remember that you're loved. By your family, and by everyone here tonight." Then Elvis did something that no one expected. He began to sing, softly, without amplification, right there in the audience. "Love Me Tender." But this time, it was just for Sarah. But what happened next is the part of this story that no one who was there will ever forget. As Elvis sang, something magical began to happen. One by one, people in the audience started singing along. It began with the people closest to where Elvis knelt, then spread row by row throughout the entire arena. 20,000 voices joined together in perfect harmony, singing "Love Me Tender" to a teenage girl who needed to feel less alone in the world. The acoustics of the venue, designed for amplified performance, somehow carried every voice perfectly. It was as if the building itself was singing. Sarah looked around in wonder. Thousands of strangers were singing to her, for her. The crushing loneliness she'd carried for weeks melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of connection to something larger than her pain. Elvis finished the song and stood up. The arena remained silent, everyone sensing that something profound had just occurred. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice carrying without amplification, "sometimes we all need reminding that we're not alone in this world. Thank you for showing this young lady and me what love really looks like." The applause that followed wasn't the wild screaming of before. It was deeper, more meaningful, the sound of 20,000 people who had just witnessed something that transcended entertainment. Elvis helped Sarah back to her seat, then climbed back onto the stage with the help of security guards who were now more than happy to assist. He picked up his microphone, and the show continued. But it was different now. Every song seemed to carry more weight, more meaning. The audience listened with a reverence that hadn't been there before. They'd all been part of something special, something real. The story could end there, but the most incredible part is what happened next. 3 days later, Sarah received a package at her home in Phoenix. Inside was a gold record Elvis's recording of "Love Me Tender," along with a handwritten note. "Sarah, keep being strong. Your daddy would be proud. Remember, love never dies. Elvis." But there was more. Elvis had made some phone calls. Through his connections in the entertainment industry, he'd arranged for Sarah's father to receive treatment at a cutting-edge cancer center in Los Angeles, all expenses paid. The treatment worked. Sarah's father lived for 6 more years, long enough to see her graduate high school and college, long enough to walk her down the aisle at her wedding, long enough to hold his first grandchild. Sarah kept that white handkerchief for the rest of her life. She framed it alongside the gold record and Elvis's note. When her own children would ask about it, she would tell them the story of the night when the king of rock and roll taught 20,000 people what compassion looked like. The handkerchief became a symbol in the Mitchell family, a reminder that kindness from strangers can change everything, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply pay attention to someone else's pain. But the impact of that night extended far beyond one family. Word of what Elvis had done spread throughout the entertainment industry. It became a standard that other performers measured themselves against, not just the ability to entertain, but the willingness to use their platform for genuine human connection. For Elvis himself, that night marked a turning point. Those who knew him well said he was different after Las Vegas. He'd always been generous with fans, but now there was a deeper intentionality to his interactions. He started ending every concert the same way, by reminding his audience that they were loved, that they mattered, that they were never alone. He began donating larger amounts to children's hospitals and cancer research centers. When his own health began to decline in later years, those close to him said he often spoke about that night with Sarah, about how helping one person had somehow helped him understand his own purpose more clearly. The white handkerchief Sarah kept became legendary among Elvis fans. After Sarah's death in 2019, her family donated it to Graceland, where it's now displayed as part of an exhibit about Elvis's humanitarian side, the side of him that millions of people never got to see. Share this story if you believe in the power of compassion. Subscribe to remember that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest impact. On her deathbed, Sarah told her children that the night Elvis stopped his show to comfort her was the night she learned that pain shared is pain lessened, that love given away multiplies rather than diminishes. The last thing she said was that she could still hear 20,000 voices singing her father back to health, still feel the soft silk of a handkerchief that proved rock and roll royalty could also be beautifully, perfectly human. In the end, that's perhaps Elvis Presley's greatest legacy, not just the music that made him famous, but the reminder that true kings are those who use their power to lift others up. Years later, when an interviewer asked Elvis about that night, he simply said, "Music is supposed to heal people. If it's not doing that, then what's the point?" He never sought publicity for his act of kindness. In fact, he asked his management team never to use it for promotional purposes. To Elvis, it wasn't a publicity stunt, it was simply what any decent human being would do. The International Hotel staff reported that after that performance, Elvis insisted on meeting with fans who seemed distressed or upset at his shows. His security team was instructed to bring these individuals backstage when possible, so Elvis could offer personal words of encouragement. This became a regular, though largely unreported, part of his Las Vegas residencies. That night in Las Vegas, 20,000 people came to see a show. What they witnessed instead was something far more precious: the moment when entertainment became healing, when a superstar became a human being, and when one girl's pain became everyone's opportunity to show love. And it all started with a white handkerchief and a man who understood that sometimes the show must stop for something more important to begin.